The canceled Last of Us live service game is around 80% complete, according to the project's former director. Welcome to Inside Games Daily, the only gaming news show brave enough to think about all the games we lost out on just for this one to get canceled.
Yeah, apparently it was in development for 7 years, had loads of investment, was kind of on the down ramp to being finished. And yeah, you hate to think about all those people, all that work, those years of effort just evaporated into the atmosphere. And again, no, we know a thing or two about that.
Yeah, we do. You're right, Lawrence. I didn't think about that. Kotaku spotted this news revealed on the Lance E. Lee podcast, in which former The Last of Us Online director Vinit Agarwal shared the tragic story of the game PlayStation canceled back in late 2023.
Yeah, so like I alluded, Agarwal worked on this game for 7 years, from 2016 to 2023. And naturally, it's very devastating after investing that much time into a project, only for it to be canceled. And apparently he found out 24 hours before the general public, which isn't a great feeling either after, 7 years of your life into a thing that just evaporates right in front of you.
But why did it happen is the question, especially with this game seemingly more finished than not. Agarwal described the industry circumstances that caused PlayStation to cancel the game, which won't really be a surprise to anyone that was following the news at the time, like we were.
Yeah, it's the same fallout we're still kind of suffering under, in addition to a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, it's COVID. COVID caused a gaming spike in popularity and revenue, all happening in 2020 and 2021, especially with online games. Everyone was stuck at home and they wanted to play games with people, so we didn't all go insane.
That's right. And then Sony invested accordingly. But as everybody should have known, the post-COVID decline in 2022 and 2023 caused Sony to reduce all that spending and investment. Did they think we were going to be in COVID forever?
All that money that flooded into the game industry was not going to be able to sustain. Because money was getting pulled out, they had to also kind of collapse the spending they'd spent. Like they overspent, basically. They were overzealous. And so one of the casualties of that was this game I was directing.
So this declining investment kind of put Naughty Dog in a position where they had to choose one project or the other, according to Agarwal. Either The Last of Us Online or Neil Druckmann's next game, which is Intergalactic. He described that as the bread and butter of the studio, that sort of narrative-driven single-player experience, and the studio made the choice to go with Druckmann's project.
Wow. That's actually really interesting, because you'd think they'd pick the service game, but they didn't. Agar also shared his inspirations for The Last of Us Online. The first is getting mugged late at night in Austin, Texas.
Yes, apparently 2 dudes with shotguns came up behind him and a friend, tripped him to the ground, demanded that he empty his pockets, which he did, and then he ran off, I guess. He called the cops after, who said they couldn't do anything about it because they couldn't find the guys who had robbed him. So there you go. That's justice.
Perfect. Agarwal also got mugged in New York at 3 a.m. How in the world is this happening to him so often?
I mean, he described in both circumstances that it was late at night. He was walking with his phone out. He said in Austin he had a big old camera around his neck. So maybe looking as tourist as a tourist couldn't look. But yeah, in this circumstance in New York, he was walking the streets with the new iPhone at the time, the iPhone 4, just out on a phone call.
Kid asks to see it. And then, of course, he hands it over. Kid says, cool, leaves, and then comes back with a gang of 8 kids. Agarwal gets off the subway and runs with the gang chasing him. He bangs on a random door. A very scared couple lets him call the cops. Cops find the kids. Kids didn't do anything. No crime was committed, of course. And then they offer to take him back to the subway.
Yeah, where he almost got taken down by a feral gang of kids over an iPhone. Yeah, these 2 experiences, as he says, formed the thesis of The Last of Us Online. He wanted people to have the feeling of being on both sides of this, not necessarily maybe being a tourist with a please rob me sign on your back, but more what he describes as the dehumanization of desperation. He described how his muggers in Austin, they were only able to buy 1 meal at McDonald's with the credit card before it got shut down. And then the cell phone they got off of him was smashed because he fell to the ground. So all they got was a couple of hamburgers out of holding somebody up at gunpoint, and that's it. Pretty rough payoff.
Yeah, seriously. According to Agarwal, his game was able to recreate the desperation of hunting and the terror of being hunted.
Yeah, he described a game scenario where there was a player searching for him in a building. The other player had left, but he decided to reload his gun. The other player heard that, chased him out of a window. They were scrambling around on the ground. And then Agarwal was hiding in tall grass while this other player was stalking after him. And he said that he felt the same adrenaline spike as he did when he was getting mugged.
Along the way, Agarwal realized the process of developing this game and confronting all these feelings was actually therapeutic. Of course it would be. It helped him stop having nightmares about these experiences. Poor guy's been mugged twice. That's crazy.
Yeah, I can understand having a little PTSD about it. Yeah, for sure. And understandably, it killed Agarwal that people couldn't play this game, especially after 7 years of investment. So he decided to move to Japan to start his own studio. Something else I can understand. When you get frustrated that a lot of your work just disappears overnight, suddenly you want to be in charge of where that goes.
Yeah, right. His game now is like 90s anime, but gritty and mature. He describes the differing game design cultures of Japan and the US. According to Agarwal, the Japanese method is more hierarchical and vision-based versus the Western style of including everyone's input and perspective.
Yeah, he wants to hybridize these two approaches to have a strong single leading vision, I suppose, but also somehow incorporate everyone's input and have a more nuanced and broadly inclusive game. So sounds awesome. I love gritty 90s anime like every good millennial, so I'm excited to see what he turns out. But yeah, going back, I think, to the topic of The Last of Us Online, the unfortunate nature of its cancellation. There's a couple of obvious questions. Why wouldn't Sony just write it out and let them? I think at the time, I remember Naughty Dog had said something like, we didn't understand, or we weren't properly expecting the amount of work that this would take, that if we actually did launch this game and try to operate it the way we need to, it would take over the whole studio. And I think, yeah, every single studio that's tried to launch a live service game, it becomes everything if they can even manage to get it off the ground. So I get that. I think the thing that frustrates me, and Bruce, you had already kind of alluded to this, is how didn't they know beforehand, both with the retraction of COVID's spending boom, but also how did Naughty Dog not understand the weight of a games as service game, especially after seeing how, Epic was transformed by trying to operate Fortnite and things like that had already happened in the industry. I don't know, something doesn't add up there. Something doesn't make sense. Certain business realities were being ignored, I think. I don't know. What's your perspective?
That is exactly right. I think that when COVID popped off and everybody started making a lot of money in the video games industry, I'm sure Sony and a bunch of other publishers we saw were like, okay, we've got an extra, $300 million. Let's throw it at a game designer we like. And which is strange because did they expect him to have it out in like a year? Like, I'm sure somewhere along the way, Agarwal was like, oh, this is going to take 3 years to get there. And they're like, sure, whatever. Like, literally just everybody ignoring the fact that it's going to come out whenever COVID stops. Nobody really knew, to, I guess, their credit, that they didn't know when COVID was going to stop. But to me, it's funny because I think back to COVID and I was like, I'm betting that everyone will go back to normal around 2022. And it was more like 2023, I think. But a lot of 2022 is when people started sort of coming out of the COVID haze. I just don't know if these, like, how did these billion-dollar corporations not know that it was going to stop and that they were going to come back down to earth? That's always my question. And actually, I think the question is the answer is they did know, they just chose to ignore it. And then people like Agarwal and lots of other employees, they suffer the consequences of that. Because if Sony had said, here's a bunch of money, but you got to get it done in a year, then they would have been like, oh, we can't do that. And it's just this is all mismanagement. It really is all the way mismanagement. Like, Sony could have just been like, you know what, never mind, we're not going to make the game. Let's put this cash into other ways of like hyping up these different studios. Obviously, Neil Druckmann's making his single player. Maybe we can beef that up a little bit when it comes out. Or I don't know. This is just so bad all the way around because it's thousands of people lose their jobs because of it.
Yeah, and have no game to show for it. At least from the consumer side of things, that's what vexes me the most, is when you have a director spending 7 years of the career on nothing. I mean, they made connections, they built experience, and all that can inform the next game. But yes, thinking about all the money that just goes nowhere is really frustrating to me. I can kind of understand it from a few perspectives. If I'm Agarwal and my team is the beneficiary of this surge of investment, who's going to say no? Even if you're seeing the landscape and you're like, okay, this isn't going to last. This will last maybe a year or 2 years. That's still 2 years of money. versus saying like, no, I'm going to do the sustainable thing and say no. Well, then the next person in line is going to pitch and say, it's going to be great. We're going to get it out on time. Don't worry. Just, I need that budget. So it all kind of comes out in the wash. It comes out in the wash minus like 300 million, or however much money was invested in this. So I understand that, and certainly I feel like I've been in that perspective too, where I have been employed by or funded by companies that I don't think are going to stick around forever. But that means that you don't sacrifice the future, or you don't sacrifice right now for what the future might be. That's not really how business works. If there's money on the table, people swipe it all as fast as they can and spend it all as fast as they can too, because you never know. I wonder too that maybe one of the turning points here was kind of like Xbox acquiring Activision. I felt the winds change. Suddenly, they started raising the price of Game Pass a ton and raising the price of their consoles. The free money had dried up. It's not nearly the same severity. The cost is maybe like less than a tenth. But PlayStation bought Bungie in early 2022. They put $3.6 billion on that. And that felt like at the time that it was part of their massive investment into online and multiplayer gaming. If that's also the same year that they saw spending start to draw back, the 2022-2023 era, I can see why suddenly there's a lot of panic at PlayStation and a lot of cost cutting. Is that they saved their biggest spend for the very tail end of the expansion. So then it's not only a course correction, it's a course overcorrection, because we overspent right at the end of the surge. So and that didn't seem to pay off very well for Sony either, given that 3 years later they got Marathon out of it, which I dearly love, but it's not necessarily gangbusters. It's not a new Destiny, at least not so far.
What's funny too, what you're describing, because you're totally right on all accounts here, is that all of those other games that PlayStation canceled, the service games, like Foam Stars and all these other bullshit games, those were part of the investment probably in 2021, 2022. They're like, they could see what Fortnite's doing, and they're like, oh, we'll just make, what did they say, 10 live service games or something? And then they scaled it down to 6. And they're like, 2. Like, the Concord is one of those, by the way. And they clearly just didn't have a plan. They were like, we've got an extra $500 million, throw them at service games. And that is wild to me. That's wild to me, because if you're in the AgWorld's perspective, one of the developers, you're going to say, yes, of course. You're going to, of course, more creativity, more time to get to make my game for a couple of years. Absolutely. But the managers at Sony, like, really? That's what we're doing? Make a bunch of fucking garbage live service games because we think one of them is going to hit? That's crazy to me. I guess Helldivers did hit. Helldivers hit. So there is that. I wonder if I take into account Helldivers revenue across all of the other budgets, all of the other games, did it actually add up? I don't know.
That's what I was wondering too. Helldivers seems like a hit because the studio approached that game with a modest scope. They didn't necessarily. It seemed like they had. I'd love to. The resources may be out there. It's kind of a side thing now that I'm undermining my point, but certainly it seems like Arrowhead didn't scale above their means. That they had a design in mind. They marched towards that iteratively and then launched a responsibly scoped game with a responsible calendar of content to support it. And yeah, it's great for them, but I wonder still if that's even a hit on the level that Sony or PlayStation was expecting circa 2021 or 2022. It seems like, based on their retraction, that they've plateaued pretty hard. And also, I think the side effect is all those investments didn't turn into games, and now there just aren't that many first-party blockbusters on the PlayStation 5, which may also have informed their rumored shift in strategy to move away from PC. If they had twice the games to seed the earth with, they may not feel the need to cultivate such an air of exclusivity around their console experience.
Yep. By the way, a cursory Google search for Helldivers revenue is they sold over 20 million copies. People are saying gross revenue is about 700 million. I would say with microtransactions, probably looking at $1 billion. I would probably around there. So they have made $1 billion on Helldivers, but did they must have spent more than that on all those live service games. They must have. Last of Us Online had to have been 200 million. Concord was rumored to be 400 million. Like, They must have spent more on those live service games that they brought in from Helldivers. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong, but it seems like it's kind of a wash.
I don't really have a concluding thought. Selfishly, I'm kind of happy things ended up this way. Not happy people lost their jobs or that a lot of money got flushed down the toilet. But I think the market is saying that they're already saturated with service games. There's not a lot of room for new ones to elbow their way in. Marathon's got the sauce, and it's even struggling to find players. So even Marvel Rivals seems like the most successful one that's managed to bully its way in. I guess you could argue that, with the exception of Concord, there was at least a little foresight at PlayStation Studios to try and close these projects down instead of just launching the game and letting them flounder on the market as they probably would have. I suppose that's the tricky thing. Between the HBO series doing really well, it's easy to imagine a world where Last of Us Online would have launched and found a stable player base. But I don't know. I don't know about that. Even if the game was well made, there's no commentary on certainly on Naughty Dog's teams or their talents. It's just that it just doesn't seem like people have any appetite for it.
Not to belabor this point, but think of it like this. Warner Brothers canceled Batgirl. They canceled the Acme movie. I think they ended up selling that. But they canceled those because they're write-downs. They could be like, okay, well, we spent all this money, but we never released it. So then that's actually less than, it never brought any income, so it's tax deductible. So if Sony, I wonder if Sony releases Concord and then within a certain amount of time, their accountants can be like, if it's only out for 2 weeks, this does not count as a game release. Then the government has to give us our money back. That's the reason they're canceling these games before they come out, is because they are write-downs, for sure, 100%. When they don't release those games, then they don't actually count as a spend, and they can't, then it's like they can bring down how much money they actually spend on the business.
Well, it's a shame. Another video game that'll never see the light of day. Luckily, when enough time goes by, people feel a little more comfortable sharing their stories. So maybe through oral history, we can experience a shred of it like we have. So yeah, check out the podcast if you want. We always link our sources in the description. And thank you for watching Inside Games Daily today. Hey, we make sure all of our episodes are 80% complete so that no one can tell the difference. It seems like we're showing up every day. We'd like to shout out some patrons that don't hold that against us for some reason. So thank you very much, Jonathan Lenowski, Lenny Nieves, Rook, Aristotle Kabat Burs, and Tito 007 for supporting us 100%. Really appreciate that. We'll see you next time on Inside Games.